The English Electric, later B.A.C Lightning, was a high-speed Mach 2 interceptor aircraft which was used by the Royal Air Force and a number of other countries. Entering service in 1960, it would eventually be withdrawn from frontline service with the RAF in 1988. A notable design feature of this aircraft was its staggered Rolls-Royce Avon jet engines. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me today as I build and review the Tamiya 1:100 scale B.A.C Lightning. For a more in-depth look at what comes contained within the box, please take a look at the dedicated unboxing video I made on that topic. In this video, however, I'm going to focus on how this kit is to build and what it looks like at the end. Interestingly, I decided to build this kit as part of the Moz 6510 Models Lightning Challenge. If you don't know who Moz is, he has his own YouTube modelling channel here on YouTube. And if you go and take a look at his channel, you can find out more about how you can get involved in this challenge and get yourself one of these nice little neat patches. I'll pop a list of the products I used on the screen now in case you fancy giving this kit a go for yourself and need a little bit of inspiration on what to use for it. Without any further ado though, let's crack on with this build. As per usual, I used my side cutters to snip away the parts from the sprues and then cleaned up any flash or rough areas of plastic with a sanding stick. I didn't bother washing this kit as it didn't feel particularly greasy, and I decided just to crack on with the build. Tamiya extra thin cement will be my glue of choice on this build. I used it to glue in the ejector seat in the front of the cockpit. There isn't much detail in the cockpit, this is pretty much it, but it does glue into its little slot. Following this, I then added some sticky tack in the nose area. It shouldn't be visible here, but the aim is to increase the weight on the nose so that it doesn't sit on its tail when the wheels are down. Up next is this Humbrol Matte 32, which is a very dark grey paint. It's not quite black, it's a little bit lighter, but it's almost there, and I used this to paint the entire cockpit area on both fuselage halves. When that was dry or drying, I then glued the cockpit halves together with some more Tamiya extra thin cement, and when that was done, I used my sanding stick to clean up those seams and make them look a little less obvious. The horizontal stabilizers could be glued into their slots on the tail of the aircraft, and then when that was done, I glued into place the wings as well. The wings come as one piece, so the uppers and lowers are molded together, and there is a slot on the top for the drop tanks. The air intake on the nose was glued into position, and then this was followed by the staggered exhausts at the rear of the aircraft. Having done this little fin type part was glued into place, and then the landing gear bay on the front was also glued into position. You can put the landing gear in a raised or lowered position, it's just a matter of assembling the correct parts for that. Here I've glued the landing gear leg to the door and then put that into position on the lower side of the wing, and then added this second part of the door. Following this, I moved on to glue into place the landing gear on the front of the aircraft, and you can see that I've also glued into place the rails for the air-to-air missiles. This step is adding the refueling probe. I did find it to be a little bit off to one side, so I spent some time just working it to be more in line with the aircraft. There is a small probe which needs to be glued into the hole on the front of the aircraft. And then the drop tanks, which I mentioned previously, were glued together. They come in two halves, and it's quite a simple matter just to join these together. These were then added into the model. However, I think it's worth pointing out that the slots are molded into the wings. So if you don't want the drop tanks on your model, you're going to have to fill those slots and tidy them up. The cockpit canopy then. If I remember correctly, the panel lines are molded on the inside, which makes it very difficult to mask. But mask it I did, and then I added it onto the model using some Humbrol Clear Fix. This glue is a little bit stringy, so you have to be super careful when using it, but it should, in the end, dry, strong and clear. So now it's time to get some paint on the model, and I'm going to just use this generic black car primer as the base layer. The black should hopefully give a good surface for the aluminium paint that I'm going to use next. So this was applied to the entire model and the small parts which have yet to be added onto the aircraft, such as the wheels. And speaking of the aluminium, I'm using this Vallejo Model Air version, and you can see that I've actually masked the walkway areas and some other parts of the model which still should be black. I did find the masking to be a bit of a pain, because I just wish that they'd included the walkway markings as transfers rather than nothing at all, and this was the only way that I could think of to get them to be represented on the model. You'll notice on the front of the model I've masked the entire canopy area because that should remain black, and also the anti-glare panel on the nose, and also on the tail there is a little bit there which has to remain black as well. With that paint now dry, I carefully moved the masking on the walkway areas of the model. I don't need to keep that masking on there for now, and it seems to have done a reasonably good job. Perhaps my cutting wasn't as neat or as fine when I did the tape, and it has left a slightly wavy edge, but it's better than nothing. After this, the gunship green colour from Vallejo was used to carefully paint the nose cone on the front of the aircraft. I didn't bother thinning this down, I just used it out of the bottle, and one coat was enough. After this, I moved on to this Vallejo black paint, and this was probably the worst part of the build. There are these lines on the bottom of the aircraft which have to also be black, and I did originally try to mask them, but I couldn't cut the masking tape thin enough, and I found it to be incredibly fiddly, and there are just so many of them. So I decided in the end that I would freehand the paint on here, and then off camera I would go back and clean that up with some more silver. But it still wasn't my favourite part of the build, and I really wish I'd had another way of doing this. Perhaps if they'd included some decals, that would have been fantastic. After this, gunmetal grey was used to paint the nozzles on the rear of the aircraft, and then with that paint dry I could glue on the wheels, which you'll notice have had the tyres already painted black. And now we can move on to the transfers. So the decals I had were a little bit yellowed, and I left them in the sun for a few days to bleach out that yellowness and make them look more white. I then cut out the transfers that I needed, and I'm going to do the RAF version, so the Saudi ones were put to one side. The transfers were then dipped into some warm water, allowed to soak, and then released from the backing paper. I'm going to be using Microset and Sol as my setting solutions in this build, so first up, Microset in the blue bottle. This was carefully painted onto the areas of the model where the transfers were going to go. Once a little bit of this solution was onto the model, the transfers were placed on and then carefully positioned. I didn't really have any issues with the transfers. I thought that they were generally quite good quality. The printing was okay. They were a little bit thick, but they went onto the model without any real issues. After this, the Microsol from the red bottle was applied on top of the transfers to further soften them into the details and make them appear as if they were painted on. Some repeated applications of this solution were needed to fully soften them onto the model. With those decals now cured, this XW1 acrylic varnish was applied to the aircraft to seal in those transfers. I'm pretty sure this XW1 is just a clear varnish, it doesn't have any matte or satin properties. Then, with that done, this white acrylic spray paint was used to spray paint the missiles which were yet to be added to the model. I'm not entirely sure that the white is the most appropriate colour, because I think red tops, which these seem to represent, were maybe a green, but the instructions do say to use a white, so that's what I did. Up next, this Revell 9 Anthracite Grey, which is an enamel paint, was thinned down with some white spirit to make a wash. This was then applied to the aircraft where all of the panel lines would be. I went for a very light and subdued wash just to make it less obvious. And then when that was slightly dry, it was removed with a cotton bud soaked in a little bit more white spirit in the direction of airflow over the aircraft to clean up any excess wash and just leave the stuff which is in the details. The penultimate step was to glue these missiles onto their rails on the side of the aircraft, and then I carefully went about removing all of the masking tape still on the aircraft. This was primarily around the cockpit area and that anti-glare panel on the nose. This, as many people have said, is quite a satisfying job, especially when you can see the good results that you have achieved. And then with that done, I plonked it onto a little display base, which is a IKEA coaster painted grey on the top, and I called this model kit complete. So, what do I think of this kit? Well, the Tamiya 1:100 scale B.A.C Lightning is a surprisingly good kit despite its age. So if you remember watching my unboxing video, it may have come as a bit of a surprise to some of you who aren't aware of the age of this tooling, but it's actually from 1968, which if you look at what we've got inside the box, that's pretty impressive. So what did we have inside the box? Well, we had two paint schemes, one for the RAF version, one for a Saudi one, but then we had a number of parts which all mostly feature recessed decals, which is something that we tend to associate with more modern kits. The fit of the parts was generally quite good. As you can tell, I didn't use any filler during this build. Some may notice a few areas where the joints aren't perfect, so some filler might be recommended, but on the whole, it is generally quite good. There are some little scratches, perhaps given the fact the age of the tooling has seen some wear and tear over the years, so there are some scratches on the plastic, but on the whole it's pretty good. Especially given the price I paid for this model kit, it is an absolute bargain. And speaking of the price, I paid £3.50 for it here in the UK from an online seller. I don't believe that this was a second-hand model. It wasn't advertised as such, it was advertised as new. So £3.50 for this kit of this quality, yes, despite its age, is pretty impressive. Having a quick look online, I've seen other sellers having it in stock for about £6, which could be justifiable as well, but if you're paying any more than that, I would definitely not be recommending it, given the fact that it does have a few small issues. So what are the small issues that we might want to discuss? Well, starting off, those walkways and those black lines on the bottom of the model, they have to be done manually. They have to be done by hand or by your own masking, and personally I didn't really enjoy that. I don't think that Tamiya have particularly helped us out on that one. Perhaps including some decals to make that a little bit easier would have been a better option, but then again you could just decide not to paint them and it probably wouldn't detract from the look of the model anyway. The transfers, I did have a small issue in the sense that they had yellowed, so I'm not entirely sure if they were brand new transfers or if they were indeed a little bit older, perhaps, maybe about up to 20 years old. It could have been a 2004 boxing, and perhaps sat on the shelf since then. But having bleached them in the sun, it does look like it's fixed them, at least for now, and they are a little bit more clear and white. The area I wasn't particularly happy with was the canopy. Although crystal clear, does have the molded detail on the inside, which is a slightly strange decision given that if you come to mask it, you then don't have any reference points to run your knife along the edges, but you can persevere and get a reasonably good result with it. On the whole though, I kind of use this as a mojo build, making very quick progress and only taking a couple of days to get this to a completed condition. So this could quite possibly be a very simple kit to have a bit of fun with, especially as it is so cheap. I could be tempted to do this one again, but sadly as it doesn't come with a pilot figure, I'd probably have to source one myself and have the landing gear raised as if it's in a flying pose. On the whole though, this is a very cheap kit if you can find it cheaply, and it does build up to quite a good quality. So if you can get your hands on one, I definitely recommend getting it. Quick reminder that if you go over to Moz's channel, you can see about taking part in his Lightning Challenge and get yourself one of these neat little patches. As always, quick shout out to my channel members and patrons for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them, take a look at the links in the description where you can find out more about the exclusive perks. I'd like to take this moment to welcome the latest members to the club. They are Fenris Hunter 500, ACF Nugget, D Lion, Sprues and Glues, Davin X, and Bossog 69. Some of those memberships were kindly donated by Crazy Loca, so thanks very much for the support. There are, however, other ways you can help support the channel directly if you feel you'd like to give a little extra support. To support the channel for free, make sure you're subscribed with those notifications on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally, I think the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.